could secure your API in a few simple steps. Hi, this is Vince. I'm with Axway. In the previous video, we added an API to AMPLIFY Central. Now I'm going to show you how AMPLIFY Central makes it easy to secure your API and protect it for your customers. Let's get started.
Now let's register a new API proxy using an API spec file. To save some time, we'll use a sample spec file for the musical instruments API. Here we'll customize the proxy details. Let's select the team it will belong to, its base path, the versioning, and add a brief description before we save it. This creates the proxy. Now we'll configure the proxy. The first tab shows the deployments. Let's deploy it to the test runtime group so that we can get our proxy endpoint. This endpoint URL is the URL that we can share with our internal development team. Then we'll go to the Test Methods tab. Here we have Test Runtime, and selected by default we see all of the API endpoints that are exposed by the underlying API. Clicking Execute makes the call to the endpoint, and boom, we get our successful 200 response, which lists all of the instruments from the API. Now we'll go to the Policies tab. The default policy is the pass-through policy, which basically means that this proxy can be invoked by anyone who has the endpoint URL. Let's change that to API key. This change means that the endpoint cannot be called without supplying an API key. We'll go back to the Deployments tab to update the deployment. This deploys a new version of the proxy. As we go back to the Test Methods tab, we see that it now requires an app with an API key to call this proxy endpoint. So let's follow this link to the Apps section. The apps allow us to associate API keys with our proxies so we can secure them. Let's create a new application and call it the Test app. Here we'll assign it to a team and add a description. And then save it. Now we'll edit this app. First we'll add an API key which gets auto-generated with no expiry. We'll go to the APIs tab and link the API proxy that we created earlier for this app. We can also restrict the deployment URL of the proxy. Now let's try our call to our newly secured proxy. We'll go back to the Proxy Details page and click on the Test Methods tab. We now see a new field called API Key, and by default, this is set to the API key that we just created. If we call the getInstruments endpoint, we get the expected result, which is an array of all the instrument objects.
Securing your API and testing it is that easy. In the next video, I'll show you how to monitor your API traffic and improve customer engagement.